During the late 50s and the 60s of the 20th century, European cinema was thriving with the exploration of new ways of making cinema. Spain was not an exception. Despite the fact it was under the Franco dictatorship, groups of Spanish filmmakers tried to escape the censorship and create new narratives. The Spanish regime was not totally against this, as it was trying to show Spain as a more open country to the rest of Europe and the world in order to attract more investment. Consequently, in 1962, the Escuela Oficial de Cine was in charge of creating a more art-driven film production, and the so-called New Spanish Cinema appeared. The New Spanish Cinema was realist and inspired by Italian neorealism. The filmmakers who later founded the Barcelona School made some realist documentary films, for instance, Dia de Muertos. Autor de Salines. Notes sur l'émigration. Although they were getting financed by the state, they quickly encountered the censorship of Francoist Spain. This led to Joachim Jourda's famous statement, "Since we can't be Victor Hugo, let's be Mallarmé." As a result, a group of filmmakers influenced by the Nouvelle Vague, the British Free Cinema, and the School of New York, from which for some they took their name, created the Barcelona School of Film. This was an obvious declaration of intentions from a co-founder of the movement, in which they used the avant-garde to avoid censorship. If they could not make a realist cinema, then they would look at new forms of telling stories, with a vanguardist cinema of rupture. For Ledesma, the Barcelona School is an understudied Spanish experimental cinema. There is not a large amount of information to be found exclusively dedicated to the Barcelona School. For Rosalind Galt, this is a result of Barcelona School being overlooked as part of the new Spanish cinema, when it actually was a sort of rejection of it. As Galt states, Barcelona School of the 1960s constitutes a significant European avant-garde film movement that has been largely ignored by film history. For Martinez Breton, the school invented nothing. They just imported foreign tendencies and a huge influence of the Nouvelle Vague in the freedom of the mise en scène, use of real exteriors and interior sets, handheld shots, the use of a narrator, or breakdown of the narrative structure. Most of it, he argues, was done with deficiencies that reminded us of homemade cinema instead of a voluntary creation equal to the French Nouvelle Vague. In addition, the Barcelona School was not only influenced by the beforehand mentioned schools or movements, but also by the early 19th century European and Catalan vanguards, especially by the Surrealists and mainly by Luis Buñuel. Buñuel was a lighthouse, both for his cinema and for his anti-Francoism militants. Actually, the eye surgery at the end of Dante Isn't Only Severe is widely seen as an homage to him. Like other film movements, the Barcelona School had a manifesto or dogma that consisted of 9 points. These were mainly regarding making a cooperative production system, constant exchange of roles or non-previous academic or professional training, experimental and avant-garde character, a cinema different from that made in Madrid, and the use of non-professional actors. Like many other film movements or schools, these rules were rapidly broken. But what made school so interesting? Well, formal innovation, experimental calling, and the rupture. Intermediality is the combination of visual, graphic, and acoustic materials of expression. Hence the use of on-screen text, freeze frames, or discordant sound that hopefully would awake the viewers against the establishment. Let's see some examples.
No.
The Barcelona School, influenced by the art movement Fluxus, utilized commercial and popular forms such as comics, advertisements, narrative cinema, pulp fiction, and many references to pop culture. They did it with subversive political intentions that ultimately did not cause any effect, but that counted as counter-cultural criticism and avoided capitalist commodification.
Por favor, que va a empezar la conferencia.
One of the most emblematic films of the school was Left-Handed Fate by Vicente Aranda. It is a dystopian film with an elliptical surrealist narrative, set in a city that is being evacuated because of an unknown danger.
¿Cómo lo sabe? Porque Álvaro siempre está donde está Jim. Gracias.
In the opening pre-credits, Aranda places a comic strip. By doing that, it reassures the commitment of the school to a composite form of narration. At the same time as it introduces the plot to the audience, it destabilizes the rules of cinematic realism.
En La Paz, los estudiantes se enfrentan con el ejército. La policía en Nagpur, en la India, carga contra los estudiantes.
In Sexperiencias, José María Núñez used pastiches of decontextualized texts mixed with images as a way of protesting world
La ciudad
events.
está sometida al intenso fuego de la artillería federal.
It is an intermedial collage of various newspaper articles. This was a method used by the school to insert cultural and ideological criticism into their films. Also, Núñez uses sound, sometimes out of sync, at times silent or mismatched to the image. For Ledesma, the incongruity and dissonant juxtaposition of text, image and soundtrack disorients the spectator and augments anxiety.
Este año puede haber 2 premios Nobel de la Paz.
And he adds, the films of the Barcelona School functioned as political interventions, resisting Franco's Spain's hegemonic structures and offering a radical alternative to realist film practice.
Funcionario público alemán.
In the films of the Barcelona School, there are numerous references to other films, which are likely homages to the new waves that emerged in Europe a few years earlier. This intertextuality can be observed mainly in the form of allusions.
He pensado meterme en eso del cine. Poner algún dinerito. Debe de ser divertido. Sí. Ve con cuidado, que hay mucho gángster metido en el cine.
Vamos, no seas pesado, déjalo. Mañana lo entregas y ya está.
Como de la mujer el consejo es poco, el que no lo toma es un loco.
Oh, Pierrot le fou.
Insisto, ¿qué podríamos hacer? Te voy a contar otra historia. No es mía. Es de Julio Cortázar.
Eso tampoco nunca se sabe.
Llama el animal que vive a 10 metros de la superficie de la Tierra y que come piedras. Tú has visto la película. En el cine Monte Carlo dan Pierrot le fou. Preciosa. Le daré un 4. Super espectáculo. Bien, un 3. Un poco pasada, un 2. Estos rusos, un 1. No me gustó nada. ¡Viva Buster Keaton! 0.
My name is Orson Welles.
¡Pum!
Unlike in Spanish cinema, the Barcelona School rejected literary adaptation. However, this did not imply that they rejected the idea of literary inspiration. They did not use literature to create their scripts, but rather as a source of inspiration. For instance, in this sequence taken from The Exquisite Cadaver, in which parts of the conversation are inspired by Saint Teresa's love poems, or just putting the literary text to live together in a sort of co-presence with their films, creating a disturbing eruption in the film. For instance, inserting fragments of Cortázar in Dante Isn't Only Severe, the protagonist summarizes a history of Julio Cortázar about a man that visits the aquarium every day to contemplate the fishes, called ajolotes.
Un día en que se dio cuenta de que no veía unos peces, sino que veía un hombre con barba y pelo muy largo que contemplaba unos peces. A partir de aquel momento, ya no tuvo que abandonar el acuario a la hora del cierre.
Similarly, in Left-Handed Fate, some dialogues were taken from Lewis Carroll or Shakespeare.
Ser o no ser. Ahí está el problema. ¿Qué es mejor? ¿Resignarse y soportar lo que nos caiga encima? ¿O intentar cambiar las cosas cuando en realidad sabemos que nada podemos cambiar? Pero ¿y si pudiéramos? Morir. Solo dormir.
The most notable example of this is in the film Quadecook Vampire, where Christopher Lee reads Bram Stoker's Dracula. By doing so, the adaptation is rejected when the story is left to the imagination of the audience.
Body crumbled into dust and passed from our sight. I shall be glad, and as long as I live, that even in that moment of final dissolution, there was in that face a look of peace, such as I never could have imagined would have rested there.
As Albert summarizes, for the Barcelona School, literature becomes malleable, transformable material, which combines and dialogues with other forms of texts, including cinema. Contrary to classic cinema, one of the characteristics of the avant-gardes was to break the narrative, altering the flow of events in the story to offer a disconcerting way of developing the fable, in the end looking for emptiness, whereas classic cinema was offering replete narratives. As we can see, the School of Barcelona gets inspiration from this, and usually shows settings in which nothingness is present. Often the film locations are empty and solitary, or they seem to be isolated. As well as this, the characters seem not to have a clear purpose in the story. To show you a few examples of this, see Christopher Lee just walking around in the Barcelona Natural History Museum. Or in the excellent movie Red Wine Night, we can see that all the film is about a couple wandering around Barcelona's old town taverns.
¿Qué camino has hecho para llegar hasta aquí y andar ahora juntos por esta calle?
Amor a alguien que de pronto ya no existe.
¿El amor o el alguien? ¿Se fue o te fuiste?
Albert argues that this characteristic is a metaphorical representation of the material and intellectual misery that the Francoist victory brought to Spain. In many cases, characters from the School of Barcelona films, aside from being immersed in an empty world, seem to have been conquered by boredom. This is reinforced by the use of repeated shots, inserting still images, slow pace, or simply by adding shoots in which nothing happens. See this clip now. Pay attention. Slow, right? Tedious?
Todavía quedan 3 minutos.
Si te parece, puedo atrasarlo. ¿Cuántos minutos quieres?
Playing with time? Some people at that time thought that some films were rather boring, but that was precisely the purpose. The school filmmakers were saying, embrace this boringness, feel it. Our cinema does not exist to entertain you. We want to make you think, we want you to participate. You must make some effort from your side to see the existential crisis in which we are installed. Tediousness is a result of modernity. Bear with me for a second. Now, Dante Isn't Only Severe is considered the Barcelona School Manifesto. Let me show you a quick analysis of the film so you'll get a better idea of the School of Barcelona. In it, we can see all the new features that made the school a distinct film movement in Spain. Film is rather cryptic, and this is partly because it is made out of 2 shorter films and some scenes recorded afterwards to facilitate the cohesion and closing. The authors were Jacint Esteba and Joaquim Jordà, and they stated that its composition was deeply meditated, so the crypticity was a purpose, probably to avoid censorship. In the prologue, we can see a group of friends chatting and having fun. It seems they are getting ready to film something. On the table there are some drinks and cameras. They also play music on a jukebox. According to Esteba, this was to make the audience feel more relaxed. Some autumn leaves were thrown at the audience on the day of the film's premiere. Keep in mind that although I will talk about acts, these are just identified parts on the analysis. As a subtitle of the film, the directors stated, a prologue, 9 episodes and an epilogue, but these episodes have never been really identified as such in the analysis. The first act starts with the opening credits. It is composed mainly with stills of one of the girls we have seen before and accompanied by melancholic music. The opening gets interrupted by a black and white cinema newsreel bulletin, similar to the ones that the Francoist regime projected in cinemas before the films every week. The voiceover praises the authorities for their rapid reaction despite several people dying in the fire. Simultaneously, we can hear some Heil Hitler in the background. Interrupting the film to show a popular news bulletin was an intention of giving the film a political meaning and a mockery of the Franco regime. Hence, from now on, we know that Dante includes a political discourse hidden somewhere between the lines. After that, we can see 2 women talking to the camera and asking the question.
What's the name of the animal that live 10 meters underground and eats stone?
In 4 different languages, here we can understand the desire for internationalization of the film. The film moves into an apartment with a couple. The woman keeps asking the same question, but the man seems to be bored and uninterested. This annoys her. Then, real footage of the street is inserted. We can see an attractive woman walking the streets of Barcelona while everybody looks at her, and it is a clear complaint against the male chauvinism still inherent in Spain. The couple's lack of communication is shown all along the film, in which she tries to entertain him with riddles and stories, such as Axolotl, one about the man who turned into a fish, written by Julio Cortázar. In this scene, we can hear Serena Bergano talking to the editor, as she is not pleased with the images chosen,
Quítenlo, por favor.
because she wanted to explain the Cortázar's history. She clearly breaks the 4th wall by doing that. Finally, when we go back to the fish story, we can see that the man is Joaquim Jordà, co-director, and that the story is explained through photographic stills. It is worth mentioning that the indifference of the man and his hobby of cutting papers is a critique of the selfishness of contemporary intellectuals and their work. The second act is a critique of the social class in which the directors grew up. Some directors of the school were born into wealthy families. We hear a man in bed complaining while we see a number of inserts that make the sequence. Here it is possible to see eye surgery for the first time, but we will talk about it later. From here, the film advances with an allegory of the story of the lion and the frog. In this version, the lion organizes a party, but he does not fancy inviting the green, wet and ugly animal. So the frog exclaims, "The crocodile has already run out of the party." For Romanos, this can be interpreted as another mockery of Francoist Spain by the directors, in which the lion is authoritarianism and the frog the marginalized opposition. Third act. In the third act, we can see a fashion model walking in front of an empty white billboard. This is a critique of a capitalist society, frivolous and snobby, in which some school members were immersed. Later in the film, a luxury car takes the woman to see her Prince Charming. But the meeting does not end well, as we know, when we see the drinks ending up overturned. This idea is reinforced in the next sequence, in which we see the big billboard, at this time with plenty of adverts, and Serena's face set on fire. Finally, we go back to the room in which we discover that the person in bed is a boy, and that we have probably seen his dream. Fourth act. In this part, we are back in the couple's apartment, and we see that the man was also dreaming. And as he explains, he had the same dreams we have just seen in the previous sequence. After that, comedic homage to classic silent cinema follows, then another section in a humorous tone explains some theories of Roland Barthes and William James. We finish with another reference to authoritarianism, in which the audience is warned that the projection will not continue until order has been restored. Another complaint against the system. Fifth act. We are now close to the end, and this impromptu part of the film on the beach still causes controversies, as it seems not to have a specific meaning. The couple continues lacking communication, and Bergano explains a story about a couple visiting a motel. It ends with a surrealist part in which an old lady dies and transmutes into a young woman in a bikini. The couple seems not to be surprised. Just watch the conversation.
Mira. Sí, ya veo.
¿Qué podríamos hacer?
Nada, ¿no ves que está muerta?
Sí, ya lo veo.
¿Le sienta bien la muerte a la vieja? Sí, muy bien.
Sixth act. The couple now appear in a flat under construction on one of Barcelona's main streets. They continue to kill time with non sequiturs and riddles. To avoid what is coming, they try to move the time backwards until Serena proclaims,
Así está mejor. Si las cosas tienen que pasar, que pasen en el momento debido.
This destruction mood is floating throughout the film.
Insisto, ¿qué podríamos hacer?
Nada, callar.
And it is a sign of the hopelessness that the directors have in Spain to change. Only destruction, not literally, will provide change. The countdown starts, and before we get to zero, the screen turns reddish, yellowish and greenish, in a clear reference to the nuclear bomb hecatomb. It follows a succession of images of billboards with animals drawn in them, and finally the name of the animal is revealed. Stone Eater.
Sale, él come piedras y se la come.
Epilogue. This part seeks to find the unity of the whole film, filmed a posteriori, and we can see the fashion model in the prologue. She is conducted to surgery for an eye intervention, the same eye that we have seen all along the film. Jourda's explanation for this sequence relates to the desire to make the audience feel uncomfortable, breaking the precious aesthetics of the film. On the other hand, for Esteba, it is a way to manifest the possibility of hope, of healing after all the destruction we have just seen. In contrast to An Andalusian Dog by Buñuel, here the eye is cured. Dante Isn't Only Severe was considered the Barcelona School manifesto. It was produced outside of the main industry. It features the main formal characteristics of the school, surrealism, modernism, avant-garde, and its subjects, modernity, society, male chauvinism, Francoism, and so on. Their goal was to open new artistic perspectives while explaining Spain's imaginaries. Duran stated, Dante is like the aboutisme of the different films from the Barcelona School. This experience is a point of arrival and also might be a point of departure. And it was, but only for a few more years. The films were financed by a special scheme from the Francoist government to create a new cinema that could achieve internationalization, but they went too far and the films were often censored again. This and a new closure or radicalization of the dictatorship, which saw its end approaching, caused the dissolution of the school as its members decided to take other paths. as Riambao, one of its main researchers, explains.
Yo recuerdo un artículo, me parece que era de un diálogo entre Carlos Durán y Joaquín Jordá, que decía, y si la censura nos prohíbe hacer más cosas, nos iremos a Vietnam o a donde sea.
O a donde sea.
Y entonces no se fueron a Vietnam, pero se fueron a donde sea. Es decir, se fueron a África, al cine militante, al exilio en Italia en el caso de Joaquín, a rodar películas en Portugal, a películas anticolonialistas, a la clandestinidad. Es decir, las fronteras se rompieron absolutamente desde dentro de la propia escuela. Yo creo que esa definición de cosmopolitismo está dentro del ADN de la escuela en general y de Jacinto Esteban en particular.
As we have just seen, the School of Barcelona was a forgotten but really interesting film movement that existed for a short period of time. My main purpose in this video has been to highlight its characteristics, and my humble hope is that this film will raise more interest in the school productions and history. About 25 films can be framed under the School of Barcelona, all of them worth being studied and brought back to light.
Y cuando se apague el proyector no quedará más que el lienzo blanco.
Girls, I don't wait after walk, I don't wait too long, love, yes. Of course, it's I don't wait to reach in, I don't wait to have to leave, yes. Of course, yes, very careful, I'm both sides, I'm both sides, your magic gets going down. I don't wait to get sloppy, yeah. Of course. It's I don't wait to reach in. It's I don't wait to get to leave, yes. Of course. Today you're gonna go to dance on both sides, to dance on both sides. Go away, go away, go away, go away. Why? Come on, girl. It's difficult. I don't wait to get to walk. I don't wait to get to live, yeah. Of course. It's I don't wait to reach in. It's I don't wait to get to live, yeah. Of course. I'm gonna both sides. I'm gonna walk wrong. The more you want to run. Living habits get no love. Gets along, yeah. Of course. It's I don't wait to reach in. It's I don't wait to get to living, yes. Of course. The getting let's go. Your party's gone away. Too much to want to run. Living happens get along.
Oh, I almost forgot to mention that the school directors made many cameo appearances.